Hi, I'm Lee Jameson, and this is the Holy Man video blog. A couple of weeks ago, I did a video talking about a conversation that I'd had with my granddaughter about fire and how we got into how fire could be a part of deeper elements of what it is that took we, creatures related to great apes, and separated us from that process of actually being great apes, and turned us into something that is defined much less by what species we are than by what ideas we are made of. And I wanted to think a little more deeply about that, because there's an important train of thought that continues out of that, and it speaks to key ideas in what it is that makes us more than just animals. Among those key ideas are religious ideas, and how we have framed those religious ideas in that middle period that is between the most deeply ancient stuff that was communicated primarily internally within tribes and sort of distributed itself among populations all around the world, but is almost entirely pre-literate, and the kind of ideas that we had after we were able to record what we were thinking about religious ideas and what those things, what the important seeming ones were at the time. The context in which I'm thinking about these things right now is I'm in the process of reading my way through the Bible here on YouTube and recording that in such a way that if you follow the sequence of them from the beginning of the year through to the end of the year, and they're numerically sequenced, you would have read through the entire Protestant canon of the Bible in a year. I've been going through Exodus and Leviticus right now. And in this period of time, God is giving instructions. Now, I have recently finished that sequence of instructions in which God tells Moses about the tabernacle. That is the kind of traveling tent, the worship area that is the traveling temple, a representation to the people of Israel of the presence of God in their midst. And the Bible I'm reading out of right now is the English Standard Version. Theological color behind it comes out of evangelical traditions in the United States. But a lot of the scholarship on it is really solid. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this is the nature of reproductions of things like worship paraphernalia, the tabernacle, the later on, because I've read through this book before, the temple complex, things like that. That this Bible, which is a study Bible, is very good at giving us information about the nature of these facilities that were so important to the people of ancient times in their religious practice. Now, this is something that don't know how well you can see that, but there is a representation of the tabernacle and the surrounding worship area. And you see cutaway in the center, or just off to one side, of the Holy of Holies on the far end, where the Ark of the Covenant went. And then there's a sort of pre-chamber that the priests would worship in at regular intervals to provide forgiveness of sins for the people of Israel, generally. So this was an important part of the representation of God's presence with the people of Israel. And I find that really fascinating because these things are deemed to be so important. So we have here a couple of pages back the tabernacle tent itself, where you see representations of that four-chamber and then the Holy of Holies, and how the space within which the presence was held to be, and so forth. What I find really fascinating about that is that this form of practice is not terribly dissimilar to the kind of practice that you would have seen in a number of pagan religions. There is, for example, on the altar, a set of horns. You have horns on the four corners, and those derive directly from the presence of horns on Canaanite pagan altars that represented in and of themselves the image of a bull, but that had been abstracted away so that what was left of the bull was just the representation of the horns, which themselves, the representation had begun to gain a kind of spiritual presence that was entirely separate from the image of the bull. I find that fascinating because you see a kind of continual back and forth of tension between a religious imagery that seems to be drawn from sources that are called Philistine, but these Philistines derive from the people that we know today because of English scholarship in the 19th century as the Minoans. So that derives from Greek stories about King Minos and their representation, the Greeks' largely dark representation of the religion of these people we know as Minoans, but that were known to the Hebrews and to the Egyptians. And you can see this in Hebrew scriptures. You can see it in the prophet Amos, the book Amos, and you can see it in a number of other areas in the Old Testament where these people are referred to as the Kaftar. They're also referred to as the Kaftar in Egyptian relief pictographic writing on their great story walls. So this people that was a largely seagoing culture and would do that really, really remarkable thing in seagoing travel of actually getting away from they would sail far enough away from the seacoast that you couldn't see the seacoast anymore, which in that ancient time was really, really remarkable. It's sort of like the difference between being in orbit immediately around the Earth and going out into deep space. So there's a tension in the kind of religion that we see in those people, and a religion that is affected by having lived among the Egyptians for a long period of time, such that we see, on the one hand, we see the monotheism that draws directly from the Abrahamic tradition, and then we see these references, this tension expressed in Aaron producing a golden calf, which, I don't know how big that would have been, but it was an icon. In scholarship, there's some debate about whether the golden calf was supposed to stand for a footstool for Yahweh, or if it was a god in and of itself. The Genesis appears to fall on the side of thinking that it was outright worship of the calf, or Exodus rather. Exodus seems to fall on the side of believing that it was worship of the calf. You see that there are things that are being borrowed from other cultures that persist into the Hebrew Israelite religious practice. And another aspect that goes with that is the idea of this enclosure that in which the presence of God is. Now, I think that represents, it's like a model of a human heart, or the presence of God within us. That's a conjecture. I don't think it's a bad conjecture, but I don't have personally much better evidence for it than that. But the way it is represented is such that it just seems over and over again, and especially when you get to the temple period, where you have a chamber that is largely void of any other presence, where the Ark of the Covenant had been kept. And another thing that's fascinating about that, and this goes back to what I was talking about a couple of weeks ago, was the idea that fire represents something spiritual, something deeply spiritual. And you see that over and over again in representations of the mountains, which could be interpreted as being volcanic. Certainly the mountains on which Moses goes up to speak to God behave in volcanic ways, and the bases of the mountains around which he speaks to God also seem to behave in very volcanic ways. There's a lot of geological instability in the Bible, let's say. For example, the phrase, the mountains shall melt like wax. Melting rocks like wax is a remarkably volcanic image. And the pillar of cloud in the day and the pillar of fire in the night, that's also fascinating in terms of its spiritual consequences. I haven't, in my readings yet, as of this recording, gotten to the point where the sons of Aaron are consumed by fire when they give unauthorized fire or offer unauthorized fire. But when one is reading the scripture and the context of what happens immediately around that and after that, one can tell that the story which it tells really seems to be a genuine story. There's a good deal of true upset about what happens in these circumstances. And you often see Scripture revealing things that happened to people who thought they were serving God, that the result of which was disastrous for some reason. And then the religious leadership, be it Moses or Aaron or King David or some others, they respond in a way as though they are completely shocked by this thing, this bursting forth that God does. So there you see people working with things that they interpret as having the presence of God with them, and those things behave sometimes capriciously or seem to behave capriciously. So it appears that their idea of what it is that is representative of God for them is carrying a power that they can't handle and they don't fully understand. They are seeking a relationship with this deity. And that's the point that I want to leave you with at the end of this video. That all along the way, in our seeking to understand what it means to be alive, what it means to be creatures who are haunted by information in such a way that what we understand and what we experience as living has more to do with the conscious experiencing of information from the universe in which we live, that it is our grasping after an understanding of that information that is creating for us a relationship with our perception of the conscious universe around us. We don't know what that is. It's easy to say, oh, well, this is God as we are supposed to understand him. And in my own denomination, I'm appreciative of a statement in the discipline that says the Bible is sufficient to salvation. I like that because it is something that is a repository of saving graces, a repository of information about human culture, information about what human beings are like, how we are the same as we were 4,000 years ago and more, and how human beings behave toward other human beings, and how human beings are kind of groping their way toward God, whatever God is. And when you get down to dealing with God himself, what does God say about God? God says, I am, in a way that is not present tense, but I am in a way that smears across time from the beginning to the end of time. I am. That's God's name for himself. That's a lot of information right there. That existence itself is prodding at us, and we are creatures made as much of information from the world around us as we are of the genetics and the heritage that comes to us from the flesh. So that portion of us that is earthly has to be instilled with the breath of God to be something really deep and interesting and the image of God that God presents to himself. Now, image of God that God presents to himself, because I'm an artist, that's a really, really, really important idea. So I will get back to that. But for right now, I want you to think about how we pick up on these bits and pieces from our ancient past, stuff around us that seems to have this great significance, spiritual ideas, ways of framing ideas about stuff in the world around us that have more informational content than just the concepts themselves would seem to suggest. And they push us along to become better able to do our job of being made of the information from the world around us. That rambled a bit, but I hope you'll think about it some and try to follow along. I'm Lee Jamison. This is the Holy Man video blog, and if you like what you see, please like and subscribe to these videos, and I will hopefully continue to make more as I grope my way through figuring out what it is and how it is I'm trying to say these things. Thank you very much.